Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 41. Today's featured guest is John Davis Jr. He is a Floridian and he is a poet. His books include Hard Inheritance, Five Oaks Press 2016, Class American Proverb, Negative Capability Press 2014, and two other collections. His poems have been published internationally with appearances in magazines like Nashville Review, Barren Magazine, the American Journal of Poetry, The Common Online, and Steel Toe Review, among many others. He holds an MFA from University of Tampa in addition to a master's in education. He presently serves as Associate Dean of Academic Affairs for Keiser University in Clearwater, Florida. If you'd like to know more, please feel free to visit his website and blog at www.poetjohndavisjr.com. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, John Davis Jr.
Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Christina. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you are on. I'm honored to have you on your Artsy Girl podcast and having the chance to get to know you and your work. I understand you are local to me here in the Tampa Bay area, and you actually grew up in Florida.
Yes, that's correct. I grew up in the south central part of the state in a little place known as Hardee County, mostly cows and orange groves. And my family has been here for about 7 generations.
Wow. So southern part, is it south of Tampa?
It is in the middle of the state toward the south. Polk County, of course, is the largest part of central Florida. And then just south of that, you have Hardee and DeSoto counties. And to their east, you have Highlands County. And that's kind of the pocket of Florida that I originate from.
Interesting, because I've only lived here for 15 years and primarily in Tampa Bay area. So you know what? I have lived here for that long and I have not really ventured out to, I've been to Tallahassee. I've been, a little bit of I've been to St. Augustine, little places here and there. I haven't even gone to Miami yet, believe it or not. But I know that there are very interesting places that I've yet to discover. So please tell me about this particular place that you grew up and your family is from.
Well, the central Florida of my boyhood was mostly cows and orange trees. Because I grew up in the middle of a 20-acre orange grove and cattle pastures were all around us, it was a great area to become a writer because you had to use your imagination. The rural environment was really conducive to reflection and invention. Now that's changing, of course, with developments kind of taking up all of the space that used to be woods or farms. It's very different.
So are you saying that even in that rural area where you're from is getting to be more developed now?
It definitely is. In fact, I was just reading the local newspaper from that part of the state, and a 50-home development has just been approved within Hardee County. And that...
How do you feel about that?
It really is a little disturbing to me because Hardee County has always had the reputation of being very agricultural and very natural, very rural and rustic, if you will. Mm-hmm. And when you have big developers coming in and just kind of throwing down houses, that can create problems.
Yes, I love history, and it's no matter where I go, I love to learn about the area. In fact, where I reside, in Pinellas County, and in this particular part of Pinellas County was nothing but orange groves, from my understanding, way before the development came in. I want to say even like in the 20s to the 40s or something like that. And interesting that there was, it was nothing but orange groves, and there was trains that actually came in and picked up the oranges and took them out. took them away. So I could only imagine what it was like back in time in even the more rural area, like where you're from. Can you describe to us like what it was like exactly?
Well, a lot of what I saw growing up included multiple acres of orange groves, and then a lot of cattle pastures. There were a great deal of farms, a great number of farms around where I grew up, and ours was one of those. Our little house was located in the middle of a 20-acre orange grove. And that provided me with a lot of opportunities, writing and imagination and those kinds of endeavors.
Have you tried to explore into more of in fiction or nonfiction also?
I have written a few pieces of fiction and nonfiction. I had, for example, some fiction pieces published by the Dead Mule School of Southern Literature. I had a short piece published by Flash Fiction magazine some years back.
Very good.
And, I even won a 50-word story contest. So I have ventured into prose, and of course, I started out my career as a newspaper journalist.
Interesting.
Before I was an educator, I worked for about 5 years for newspapers in Central Florida, including the Tampa Tribune. And that gave me a very strong sense of what it means to be concise.
Okay, so now you answered my next question was, how did you get into writing? So you started off in journalism. So how long have you been writing?
I have technically been a poet longer than I have been a journalist or prose writer, I suppose you could say. There's sort of a cool story behind this. When I was about 13 years old, I climbed my grandparents' barn roof with a copy of Robert Frost's collected poems. The book had been my mother's during her time at Stetson University, and I was looking over our orange grove while reading about apple picking, because of course it was Robert Frost. Something just clicked for me. I suddenly felt like poetry was something I was meant to do, to write the world around me in the same way that Frost chronicled New England. So that's how it started. A barn roof, a copy of Frost, and an epiphany.
So would you consider yourself a Floridian Robert Frost then?
It's funny you should say that. On the back cover of my first really major book, I guess you could say, if we could call it that, Peter Meinke, who is the poet laureate of the state of Florida.
I'm familiar with Peter, yes.
He included a blurb for me that called me a Southern Robert Frost. A great compliment.
It is. Especially from Peter also. That's awesome. Yeah. So could you share with us a couple of poems from one of your collections?
I can. I have a couple of new pieces here, actually, that have seen publication in Florida journals recently, or at least in regional journals, and I thought I'd share those, if that's okay.
That's fine. Yes, please.
All right. The first one is Statue Boys, and it recently appeared in Tampa Review. I have spent the last few years really contemplating what happened at the Dozier School for Boys in the Panhandle.
Yes.
Where they
now let's go ahead and explain that to the audience briefly about who they are.
Dozier School for Boys was in the Panhandle. The physical structure is still there, but it has been closed. In 2014 or thereabouts, the bodies of 55 boys were found buried on the school grounds in anonymous graves. 41 other boys are thought to be buried nearby, and they're still searching for their bodies. The horrors that occurred there included all different types of abuse, and it spawned a huge investigation and wound up with the school closing. But my very first job when I became a teacher was at a juvenile boot camp. The horrors at the Dozier School for Boys included all different forms of abuse, and the survivors of that institution, even to this day, have a variety of psychological side effects from the time that they spent there. Right. And as a poet and as an educator, that entire situation really spoke to me. And so I have written about it for the past several years. And the first poem I'd like to read today actually is inspired by the situation at Dozier, because I did a little digging into the historical records, and I found that most of the boys who were sent there for things like being truants, petty thieves, that sort of thing. Now, that's not to say they were all angels, but a lot of them were sent there on these very minor charges. And so this first poem, as I mentioned, is from Tampa Review, and it is entitled Statue Boys.
Okay.
Statue Boys, for Todd and Michael, convicted of trespassing. We knew our names were already deader than Confederate generals erected in gray cement at Dunson Park, but nobody would care about curs like us that summer of seedless melons and faulty bike chains. So we posed atop the platformed columns in front of the old marsh place, raising sleeveless arms to point long invisible sabers at some butternut horizon we'd never see. Protruding our pretend metalled chests, we awaited some darker enemy, economy, phosphate mine labor, or its blue-collar cancers, to end seasons, break cycles, fell us from small-town pedestals.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that was an awful part of Floridian history. I mean, I believe they did a movie, perhaps, I think, and I think someone have written about that also, a novel. So that was in Tampa Review. Do you have another one you'd like to share with us?
I do. The second poem that I would like to share was published by the New Southern Fugitives. It was nominated for a Pushcart Prize last year, so I thought it would be a good one to share as well.
Okay.
It is Tractor Ghosts. Grandfather, I am driving your memory back to the shed. Your tractor's power steering is shot, and navigation demands a farmer's muscle to raise specter-gray clouds of soil. Diesel smoke stays in this baggy work shirt, and it triggers your lessons: solenoid, starter, alternator, filter, and all the anatomy I'd need to keep your machine intact. Like a staggering November deer, this mechanical animal is wounded, dripping red liquid down every middle. Its bleating gears draw a DNA spiral of vultures. Everything falters. Even with tools of lineage and legacy, I cannot keep life inside it. To get enough jump for juice, I charge the battery overnight and pray. Stubborn, it will crank again, sensing the wrong spirit controls its way. These unscarred fingers, these lineless eyes know city currency, university books. They fail the stiff-turning wheel.
And there you go. And that's where I don't want to say your muse, but your influences that influence your writing. Do you stay in that particular theme? Do you explore other themes also?
I do. I have written a number of different poems based upon some time I spent overseas. In 2016, I was fortunate to be part of the Disquiet International Literary Program, and the time that I spent in Lisbon was really an eye-opener for me, poetically speaking, to get a new and different feel for the world at large, as opposed to being almost exclusively regional.
Right. You came out with a body of work from that?
I did, and honestly, it provided me with much needed time to edit and revise and make changes to work that I had already come up with. I like to think about how when Hemingway was in Paris, he wrote of Michigan, and when he was in Michigan, he wrote of Paris. When I was in Lisbon, I wrote about home, and then, of course, when I came back home, I began writing about Lisbon. And so I think that's just something that happens to writers. Right.
So how long were you there?
I was there for 16 days, and I had my wife and my two sons with me. During the day, I would go and do poetry workshops, and they would explore the museums and the castles and the other landmarks over in that part of the world. And then, of course, for the afternoon and evening, we would be able to come together as a family and go and do events together.
That sounds like fun. Yeah, that must have been like a really enriching experience. So, with that said, what are your current projects and your future goals then?
I have a lot of irons in the fire, as they say. In addition to my Dozier School project, which is still kind of on the back burner, if you will, I do have a manuscript that is a new and selected edition. I've been writing poetry now for about 20 years, and, well, truly writing poetry for about 20 years. So like I said, I started when I was 13, but I really don't think anybody wants to read that. So I have gathered together a lot of the poems that have been best received over the last 20 years. And I have a new and selected manuscript that I am putting in front of various publishers even as we speak. And in addition to that, I also volunteer my time at the Firehouse Cultural Center in Ruskin, teaching poetry workshops there and providing a little literary guidance to folks of the South Shore, Hillsborough County area.
Nice. Okay. Well, you're giving back to the community. That's awesome. So I like to ask this question to learn about each other's process. So do you have any so-called set routines or things like that?
I really wish that I was a routine person. I am one of those writers who would benefit from rising every day in the dark of early morning and putting in hours. And at one time, I did that. But my life now is different, so I catch writing time when I can.
Yes.
You know, it's one of those kind of things where last summer I took part, actually this most recent summer, I took part in 2 writing retreats, one in Tennessee, the Orchard Keeper Writers Residency, and then the other was in Arbor Vitae, Wisconsin, where I led some poetry workshops for Word and Community Writers Retreat, and that was held at Marywood Franciscan Spirituality Center there in Wisconsin. Both of those retreats allowed me to focus on my work, and like travel always does, it changed my perspective. So rather than being kind of a routine person where I rise every day at a specific hour and try to put words on paper, I have found oftentimes that simply by going somewhere else, I can fake it, in essence. I can put myself into a different circumstance, and by changing my routine, it's more generative than if I were trying to force upon myself something that felt artificial.
I like that you said that, because I've talked to poets who are the set routine type, you know, and I'm sure that they mix it up as well, but I like that because your process is the same as mine, because I thrive in different experiences, and of course, feeding off of others, you know, like talking to you and talking to others on the podcast. It really feeds into my creativity and my perspectives as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is another way of thinking of how do you get inspired? How do you get your ideas, and opening yourself up to a world of possibilities. Where can people go to learn more about you and your work then?
I have a website, and that is poetjohndavisjr.com. And I have a profile available at Poets and Writers Magazine, which most folks are familiar with. That is pw.org. And my listing there includes writing credits and a little bit more about me. I keep both of those venues fairly well updated, both my website as well as my profile. And at my website, I have a blog that people can subscribe to as well.
Great. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great talking to you and learning more about you and your work. I wish you the very best of luck, and I look forward to seeing more of your publication. Please keep me abreast on that, okay?
I very much will. Thank you.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, John.
Bye.